we'll start with bonjour, square se my name is Drea Gallagher, and I guess I'll also start just by saying a few words about myself. I'm a master's student at the University of Manitoba, and I'm studying Canadian politics, specifically looking at Aboriginal politics and citizenship for my master's. And my family is originally from Sagini First Nation here in Manitoba. My mom went to residential school, and I grew up though outside the city, so I went to school actually in Transcona. So I guess when asked to speak about myths of Aboriginal participation and voting in elections in Manitoba, the first thing I always think of is, there's just such generalizations for Aboriginal people, and I look at cases such as myself, and it's not necessarily like what you would be looking at. You're looking at Aboriginal urban populations or on-reserve populations, and it's not one homogeneous group of people. So to say that all Aboriginals don't vote, I vote. I voted every year since I was able to vote. So that's just the first thing. I have a few notes, and they'll probably be brief. I kind of don't want to say too much more than I think Dr. McDonald was pretty extensive on the background of Aboriginal participation in Manitoba. So I just want to say that, for many reasons, as the literature shows, Aboriginal people are less likely to engage politically in the same manner as other Canadians. This situation reflects partly the history of colonialism, which has created unwillingness on the part of many Aboriginal people to engage in the political system. So to start off, in terms of the Indian Act, status Indians could obtain the right to vote at any point so long as they chose to enfranchise, which is to say to give up or forfeit their status as Aboriginal people or as Indians, as they'd said, and take up the duties and benefits of Canadian citizenship. So giving up their identity and giving up the rights that go along with that. But there was also, importantly to note, I think, forced enfranchisement, which could have been through military service, or could have been through if you were too educated at the time, and that continued to breed this atmosphere of distrust between the Aboriginal population in Canada and the government. So this continued until 1960, as far as voting is concerned, where after 1960, Inuit and Aboriginal men and women on reserve, off reserve, won the right to vote. So as far as Manitoba goes, I think it's interesting to note that in Manitoba, First Nations people had a quite high rate of voter turnout, federally and provincially, directly after the vote was extended to Aboriginal peoples in the 1960s. And it has fallen, as we can see, dramatically since then. So it's reached all-time lows. And, instinctively you would think that this is because of, many different things which have happened to the relationship between Aboriginal people and the Canadian government, or in cases, the provincial government during this time frame. In 2003, the turnout rate on Manitoba reserves, for example, reached 26.7%. So that's less than 1/2 of the overall voter turnout to that election. Another interesting fact I find is that low turnout rates in federal elections or provincial elections doesn't necessarily match up with the sometimes high turnout rates we see for band elections. So we see participation varies according to this government elections, and so it demonstrates, I think, not necessarily Aboriginal people are lazy or they don't want to get involved politically in any way. It's a lot of the times, it's the context or the kind of involvement. Also, some youth we found choose not to vote because they did not identify as Canadian and withdrew from the Canadian electoral process. So we've talked about this already on the panel, and that's definitely true of some. Both in theory and in practice, many Indigenous youth focus their attention on traditional governance, and most do so to the exclusion of Canadian institutions. Their reasons for rejecting Canadian electoral participation are rooted in historical experiences and at the family and community level, as well as philosophical or political understandings based on the Indigenous state relationship. So, according to research in Winnipeg, urban Aboriginal people actually made it clear that if they were to be approached by political parties and asked to vote, they would be likely to do so. This is research done by, I believe it was Joel Silver. I have the citation if anybody wants it later. Furthermore, they responded that they would be even more likely to go out and vote and participate if Aboriginal candidates were running for office. Many youth also argued that supporting and encouraging and voting for Aboriginal candidates was paramount. So, according to Jim Silver, while researching electoral participation in Winnipeg, the nationalist explanation appears to be a factor in explaining urban Aboriginal non-voting in mainstream elections. And furthermore, some argue the opposite case, that in order to protect their rights, urban Aboriginal people ought to vote in mainstream elections. So I find that interesting. That's one of those myths that you keep hearing, is that a lot of Aboriginal people don't vote because it will hurt their claim to sovereignty, or it'll give legitimacy to the government, the federal or provincial governments. And that's true in some cases, and some definitely, I know some Aboriginal people who believe that, but that's obviously not the case for everyone. So that's kind of the one thing that I found, is that a lot of these myths, tend to really be focused on generalizations of the population. And furthermore, the population of Aboriginal people, particularly Aboriginal youth, is in a way fracturing more and more all the time. There's more facets. It's such a diverse society. And furthermore, it's been noted, it's been noted, I think Professor McDonald's noted it as well, that there's more Aboriginal youth attending post-secondary education, and it's been written that there is a strong correlation between the level of education and the likelihood for voting. So that's not just, you know, any population, that's also Aboriginal youth. So that increases the numbers of Aboriginal people, you know, voting every year. So I see more and more, you know, participation in many ways, and I see more willingness to vote than ever before. So I think it's really up to watch and see what trends come in the future. You know, the more the population is kind of evolving, we'll see different trends emerging for Aboriginal participation and voter turnout, especially in Manitoba, I think.